dazzled by these things than most. But we have a very wonderful panel to speak to us today on a theme that is really increasingly important, and that is understanding religious heritage, sacred sites, protecting sacred sites, how they play into sort of international affairs, how they play into peace, how they are critical for believers. And I think what we'll do is I'm going to go somewhat out of the order of the program. We'll hear first from Knox Thames, who is now at the Pepperdine University. Knox has the distinction of having served, I think, in every federal office that deals with religious freedom over the past 30 years, 25 years, something like that, yeah. But he's someone who brings great expertise, and he's had some sort of distinctive experience working in that area. So let me turn first to Knox, and then we'll go on.
Great. Well, it's a privilege to be here, and like Dr. Durham said, my name is Knox Thames. I'm a senior fellow at Pepperdine University and a visiting senior expert at the U.S. Institute of Peace. But for 20 years, I worked in various diplomatic roles representing the United States on issues relating to international religious freedom and the rights of religious minorities. One of the questions I often grappled with was, at this time of increasing diversity and increasing intolerance, how can we foster interreligious peace and appreciation for pluralism when it seems that human rights abuses are never ending? And part of the area of research that I've been focused on with Pepperdine is the power of sacred sites to be unique inflection points to promote conversations about pluralism, diversity, and respecting the rights of others. And so the question that we've been thinking about is, how can we leverage the power of sacred sites to be places of inclusion instead of exclusion, to be places that encourage thinking about living together in diversity? With our research, at Pepperdine, we've framed this as a framework for promoting pluralism, diversity, and respect for others' beliefs through sacred sites in a locally acceptable, flexible, and sustainable way. This comes from my work over the years, 3 observed commonalities, regardless of history and culture, that every community has a history of diversity. Maybe they don't accept it, maybe they don't remember it, but that's true. Every community is grappling with diversity, and every community has sacred places that can be places of pluralism. When I was doing the diplomatic work representing the United States, we'd go into a country and meet with the foreign ministry, the Ministry of Interior, and urge them to do more to protect religious freedom. But so often we were responding to the disease, the symptoms of the disease, and not the disease itself. And so to get upstream of the mentality that leads to human rights violations, we have to do something different. And I think this is where sacred sites are an unexplored area that offer unique advantages and opportunities. One is that by leveraging the power of sacred sites, we can bring together different areas, different expertises from the human rights world, from the religious freedom world, but also from the cultural heritage preservation world and the interfaith world. If we're successful by using sacred sites as a place to start conversations, we're actually not lecturing, we're listening. We're asking a community to reflect on their own stories of diversity, to think about the good and the bad, and then to use that narrative as the jumping off point for talking about how do we live together in diversity today. Now, I would also point out that these sacred sites, they can be ancient places. Through my travels in the Middle East, you'll see old churches and mosques and synagogues and Zoroastrian fire temples that have been preserved or not, or ignored. But there's also modern sacred sites, places that have a spiritual component. And so this new area, we're trying to think about how do we use them to increase cross-cultural religious literacy, promote respect for holy places, and we think it's a missing piece of the puzzle. It won't solve everything, but they're a unique opportunity to do something different in a different way, again, in a way that's listening. We're not lecturing. We had a conference through my program back in March in Vevey, Switzerland, about an hour outside of Geneva, where we convened experts from these three different areas of expertise: human rights, cultural heritage preservation, and interfaith work. It was incredibly encouraging. We see opportunities. We've started to form partnerships with groups doing this work in Indonesia and Lebanon, in the UAE and the United Kingdom. But now, as a next step, we're trying to find other partners, particularly funding partners, that would be able to allow us to test these ideas in the field. We've established the theory. We've gotten positive feedback from folks who are looking for innovative ways to address issues of intolerance. So we're hoping to find those partnerships that can allow us to really test this, either in an educational context, a youth context, a civil society, community engagement context. But again, this idea of sacred sites promoting pluralism, we want to create this framework that promotes pluralism, diversity, and respect for others' beliefs through sacred sites, using them as a launching point. And we think it can be done in a locally acceptable, flexible, and sustainable way that would bring benefits in a way that traditional human rights advocacy has yet to realize. So it's great to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you very much, Knox, and I'm sure people may have questions later, but we'll go ahead and go through the speakers first. Our next speaker is Archbishop Nikitas, who is the Archbishop. I don't know what Thyateira is, sorry. You can explain that, but Great Britain I do understand. He's one of the ranking clergy from the Orthodox tradition with us. We're very grateful to have his experience and his perception as a religious leader of why work on sacred sites is so important. So let me turn it over.
Good afternoon and thank you. Thyateira is mentioned in the book of Revelation, for example, as one of the 7 ancient churches. But I'm here really as president of KEC, the Conference of European Churches. When one comes to his moment for speaking, he or she would want to think outside the box, because we all want to preserve religious sites, we all want to care for them, we all want to see them for the next generation as tools of education, religious understanding, history, culture. I chose to look at 2 negative aspects. Negative in the way that religious sites, if you'll allow me the expression, have been raped by the world and by human beings. They have been emptied of their treasures, and many of them have been lost. Some belong to private galleries and organizations. And we see that having taken place in Thailand, India, Turkey, Afghanistan, Cyprus, Kosovo, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Greece, so many other places, including the United States. And I want to speak first about greed. The idea of overtaking a sacred site for profit and for money. We see what were once cemeteries, graveyards, now is the land being used for condominiums, houses, golf courses, and other things. We see a chapter of history that's being erased and being covered by not the sands of time, but by physical sands. We see that in this idea for greed, people take property from religious sites, icons, statues, and other things, and sell them to art collectors for profit. We see those things having been stolen from synagogues in the time of the Second World War, including art pieces and other artifacts that were taken into the homes of private collectors for nothing more than perhaps some food or something else. We see that because of war and colonialism, we see that increased tourism has brought destruction to religious sites. All you have to do is read the news every once in a while and you'll see that a tourist has carved his or her name on some wall, some sacred place. We may not consider some sites as being sacred, but other groups do. And then religious sites and the activities upon them has destroyed the environment because of the buildings, because of construction, and so many other things. And we forget that these places were holy for some people. So we are depriving people, especially indigenous people, of the rights to worship and to live on their lands. What about the animals that are considered as being sacred? We think of them in other ways for our needs, our food, and whatever else. I mention these negative aspects, if I might use that terminology, to make you think about things and to think outside the box, because we're not here to hear the same story over and over. Let me tell you one last thing. It's rather sensitive for me as an ethnic Greek. The Parthenon and the sculptures, the marbles, were sacred to my people, and they were stolen. The time has come for them to be returned, just as artifacts are being returned to Egypt, to Turkey, to other places of the world. We should not take what is not ours, and we should not take land and sites and change them for our own benefit and for the case of profit and money. Thank you.
So I will turn things over now to my co-chair, Marcio. I can't pronounce your last name. Ponzilacqua? Oh, I did pretty well.
For me, it's a great opportunity to speak for you, but I will speak in Portuguese. It's more comfortable. Boa tarde a todas as pessoas aqui presentes, paz e bem. Eu sou o professor Marcio, também sou padre católico de fisionomia franciscana. A minha origem é na ordem franciscana. E atualmente respondo como vice-diretor da Faculdade de Direito de Ribeirão Preto, da USP, da Universidade de São Paulo. Ali temos uma proposta bastante inovadora e uma das minhas linhas de trabalho é justamente Sociologia do Direito e da Religião. E nesse intuito, como franciscano...
We don't know if the translation is working. Does anyone know if it is? It's not working, sorry.
No? Bom,
Maria can summarize at the end in a minute or two.
Você vai tentar. Ah, vai. Tá bom. Bom, então vamos começar de novo.
So let's start again.
Eu sou o Frei Márcio, Padre Márcio, católico.
His father, Marcio, and he's Catholic.
De origem franciscana. Minha espiritualidade é franciscana. Franciscan's spirituality. My spirituality, my formation is like Franciscan.
So his spirituality is franciscano.
É Franciscan.
Franciscano.
Bem, eu sou professor e vice-diretor da Faculdade de Direito de Ribeirão Preto, da USP, da Universidade de São Paulo.
He is law professor in USP, Universidade de São Paulo.
Eu vou tentar sintetizar um pouco o meu pensamento para facilitar a tradução.
He tried to make more simple what things to try to translate.
Para mim,
For him,
a relação entre natureza,
the natural relation
locais sagrados,
and faith place,
sacred place,
sorry,
e direitos socioambientais é muito íntima.
and social rights is really connected. It's really intimate.
Na tradição franciscana de São Francisco, St. Francis tradition,
In in the Catholic religion, São Francisco religion. You
Não, não é uma religião. O franciscano é uma espiritualidade. Acho que é melhor ela.
São
Se-
I am going to help. Sorry. Yeah.
Na tradição franciscana,
In our tradition as Franciscans,
a relação entre a concepção
the relationship within the conception
de mundo
of our world
e a natureza
and the nature,
é muito próxima,
it's very, they have a lot of proximity.
com cuidado das pessoas também.
Yeah, because in this conception, we have a really big relationship between nature and human beings.
Então, a natureza nos precede em termos de constituição, de existência.
Yeah, because the nature is the very starting point of our being.
Então, na verdade, nós invertemos a ordem das coisas.
Yeah, and truly, what we do is that we are reverting the issues because we are not taking into account that nature is before us, but we are thinking that we are before nature.
Nós teríamos que pensar primeiro os direitos da natureza,
That is why that we need to think about the rights of nature.
como falam algumas tradições latino-americanas da Mãe Terra,
Yeah, because we have also these traditions as the Mother Earth in Latin America.
e também na concepção franciscana. Ele fala
And
de mãe,
and also in our conceptions as Franciscans.
fala de Mãe Terra.
Yeah,
E
we
depois
talk
é que nós
about Mother
poderíamos
Earth, and then we can think.
Depois nós poderíamos pensar nos nossos direitos, mas nós invertemos e o nosso modo de visão subverte
Yeah.
essa relação.
Oh yeah. What happens is that we are reverting this relationship because we are thinking. He's repeating. We are thinking first about us and then in nature.
Para o franciscanismo, todo lugar é sagrado.
For Franciscans, everything, every place is secret.
Mas existem experiências e espaços privilegiados
Yeah.
de relação com o sagrado.
We have also many steps, many secret steps with our relationship with secret.
E que precisam ser especialmente olhados, cuidados
Yeah.
e protegidos também por lei.
That is why that we need to protect these places also because the law has to protect also these places.
Noutra ocasião desenvolvo mais porque meu tempo
Yeah.
acabou.
In another occasion, I'm going to talk a little bit more.
Thank you for
Thank you.
okay. Agora vou apresentar a Maria Cláudia Bucchianeri Pinheiro. Ela é ex-ministra do Tribunal Superior Eleitoral do Brasil e vai também fazer sua exposição, igualmente em português, é isso? Então, se por favor. Não está funcionando ainda a tradução? Não,
Good evening, everybody. I'm Maria Cláudia Bucchianeri. I'm a former judge at the Electoral Supreme Court of Brazil. And I study the religious freedom, liberty in Brazil. It's an honor for me to talk with you guys, to learn with everybody here.
Do you want that I translate into?
Do we have many Brazilians in here or not?
I do speak Spanish only.
Oh, Spanish?
Yeah, Spanish. I do speak Spanish. But I
No,
understand
English.
Portuguese, but you're doing
If we go ahead in English, do we have many Brazilians here that want understand what I'm saying? Can I go ahead in English?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm gonna do my best. Okay. And I'm here to talk a little bit about religious sites in Brazil. What is our situation, our real situation right now regarding the Afro-religious here in Brazil, which are the fourth largest religion in Brazil. They're from Africa. And we have many, many episodes of violent episodes in candomblé sites in Brazil. And that is a problem that is related to religious intolerance. which is growing very much in Brazil. For you to know, in 2020, we have 86 reports of violent actions against places where candomblé is practiced in Brazil. In 2021, this number, which was 86, it went to 244. And in 2022, we had 1,200 episodes of violent acts against terreiros, which is the name of the secret sites for the candomblé in Brazil. So here, what I wanted to propose and to think of with you, it's which measures do we have to take as a country, as a nation, to protect every religious site, not only from robbery and property, but from the religious intolerance, which is growing in our country related to political polarization. The political polarization, which is a reality not only in Brazil, but in many other countries, is reflecting in the growth of religious intolerance. In 2022, we had general elections in Brazil, presidential elections in Brazil, and we noted that many of the political attacks were related with the religion of the contendants. So Bolsonaro was often related to Christians, religions, evangélicos, religions, not Catholics. And Lula was related, especially her wife, our first lady, to candomblé. And most of the political attacks were connected to religious attacks. And as a result of that, we can see, we can have a major growth on violent actions against sacred sites, especially from Africans' religions. So here, what we proposed is a major pact of religious tolerance and political tolerance. And if it's possible, to separate political from religion. The necessary respect we must have between politicians, but at most, the respect for all the religions and the necessary explanation of all their tradition and their culture and their importance for each community. That's it. Thank you very much.
You did a great job.
I did my best.
Is Imam Marwan Gill, Imam from Argentine Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Please, thank you for your presence between us.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. For me, it's a very important topic. A German philosopher, he said that a society where people start burning books, eventually the society finishes burning human bodies. Likewise, I think a society which fails to protect religious sites eventually will also fail to protect the sanctity of human life and human race or any society. For me as a Muslim, it's very important to be part of this panel because sadly, unfortunately, it's many times Muslim societies where we see that religious sites, be it temples, synagogues, churches, or even mosques, are not protected as they should be. But at the same time, I would like this opportunity to clarify, just because some groups claim to be Muslims, it doesn't mean they are representing the true values of Islam. Because Islam, which literally means peace, is a guardian, a protector, not only of the mosque, but any religious site. a term which is many times very wrongly understood and falsely interpreted in especially Western societies, is the concept of jihad, where people associate it with the religious war against non-Muslims. Or when we see those violent scenes, people attacking religious sites, we associate it with jihad. Although jihad has a completely different meaning. It means struggle. And where Quran, the Holy Quran of the Muslims, commands the Muslims to carry out this inner struggle, which means to fight against evilness, it's very interestingly, before mentioning any mosque, the Holy Quran in the chapter 22 mentions that it's a responsibility of a Muslim society, of Muslim leaders, and let it make clear, before mentioning the mosque, it mentions religious temples, synagogues, churches, and any religious temple. So it means that the Muslim has a responsibility to protect, honor a mosque. Even more importance he should be given, or he should give, to any religious temple. And just to give a short example, because for us Muslims the most sacred place is the Kaaba, the Holy Kaaba in Mecca. And there has been given two important characteristics of the Kaaba in the Holy Quran. First of all, it is said it's a place where human beings find peace. So a religious temple should be a place where anyone, be he the follower of this religion or not, where he can feel protected and in peace. And secondly, a characteristic of the Kaaba is that it's a place of safety, security for all humanity. And one interesting point is that why it is so important to protect the religious sites. I think because these religious sites, that's the place where we're gonna learn as human beings then to protect and honor the sanctity of life and Mother Earth and all the creation. And with just a small anecdote, I will finish my words. Once the Prophet was speaking to his disciples, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and people asked him, where can we find piety and righteousness? And he said, and he didn't say that you will find it in the mosque or in any religious temple. He said, God or righteousness you will find in your heart. So the message is that we should convert our hearts, first of all, into a temple, into a sacred place, because this will then allow us to give the due importance and sanctity and respect to the creation of God. And obviously this includes all the religious sides. So thank you very much. That is for a small reflection.
I have the honor to present the Rabbi Simantob, Nigri, Rabbi Israelite Union of Peru, and Vice President, Interreligious Council of Peru, Religions for Peace. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, thank you. Sou brasileiro, vou falar em português. Posso pedir ajuda? Obrigado. Ok, bom, shalom a todos. Muito obrigado pela presença. Uma honra para mim poder compartilhar com vocês. Eu gostaria de... Perdão.
I am very happy to share with you. Shalom, everybody.
Obrigado. Eu gostaria de, na minha exposição, analisar com todos a origem dos lugares sagrados nas Sagradas Escrituras, na Torá.
Yeah. I would like to analyze about the secret places that are related to the Torah.
A primeira vez que aparece o conceito de um lugar sagrado na Torá,
The first time that it appears the concept of the secret place in nature,
é quando Deus se revela a Moisés.
it is when God reveals to Moses.
As Escrituras nos descrevem que ele viu uma sarça ardente em fogo,
You know that
uma pequena árvore.
the
Né,
story of
com-
Moses
sim,
when
com
God
segundo-
appears in a, how to call it, in a bush, a burning bush.
Em Êxodo, ele escuta uma voz que fala para ele,
Yeah.
tira os teus sapatos,
And he listens a voice.
porque o
and,
lugar que você está é um lugar sagrado.
And that says, this place where you are putting your feet is a secret place.
Os comentaristas no Talmud explicam que cada palavra da Sagrada Torá tem uma relevância a todos nós.
Oh yeah, they say that the Holy Torah has a big relevance to everybody.
E que aqui a mensagem é que onde nós pisamos, esse é um lugar sagrado.
And the message is that the place where you are putting your feet is a holy place.
Depois a gente acompanha quando os hebreus, depois da escravidão no Egito, uma das primeiras ordens que eles recebem é de construir um santuário, construir um lugar sagrado.
And then there is an order to build a secret place.
No judaísmo, um tabernáculo, um mishkan, um santuário. No judaísmo, um dos nomes do Criador é Makom. Makom em hebraico significa lugar.
Oh yeah, all the holy places, the secret places have a name, Makom.
Makom.
Makom, and that means place.
Ou seja, para o judaísmo, claro que Deus está em todos os lugares, portanto, todo lugar é sagrado, e onde a gente está, a gente consagra o lugar com a nossa presença.
Oh yeah, for Judaism, yeah, and every place is secret, and people are the ones who consecrate this place.
Mas existem lugares, eu falo que é igual uma antena de rádio ou a sinal do Wi-Fi pega melhor aqui que lá. Tem lugares onde a presença divina talvez está mais revelada, né? Pela história daquele lugar, pela reza daquele lugar.
Yeah, but of course we have some places that, for instance, a place where the lighting came, the flash, let's say, and this has more power.
Exatamente. Como, por exemplo, nos lugares de oração, como as igrejas, as sinagogas, as
And that
mesquitas.
is why that we have
certo.
these places as mosque, churches, many places where people pray.
O que é realmente lamentável hoje em dia é perceber como, às vezes, a vandalização chegou a, às vezes, vandalizar até cemitérios, né? A gente hemos visto lugares com suásticas em cemitérios judaicos destruídos e outros, mas isso é um tema que a gente, como líderes religiosos, com certeza temos que punir e estar consciente do que está acontecendo.
That is why that I want to talk that there are some places like cemeteries that are being destroyed, and they are just writing names on these places, and I think that it is very important for us as religious leaders to take into account and to be concerned about these issues.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, I want to express thanks to a lot of people. We have another speaker, and then we'll open things for discussion. But I want to say special thanks for spontaneous interpretation. And well, we're trying to go forward on many fronts. Thanks also to Archbishop Nikitas. I did know you were here for the Council of European Churches as well, but thank you for interceding and correcting me on that. And my version of Revelations, it's spelled differently, so that's my problem. So in any event, our final speaker is Elizabeta Kitanovic, who is with the Council of European Churches and is a close friend who has been helpful on numerous fronts, but she has had a great deal of experience working with helping religious communities to prepare for or protect against violence. So she has some additional perspectives to bring to our discussion.
Thank you, Cole. This time I will focus basically on financial support for the protection of the worship places. Basically, the secret sites, whether they are ancient forests, pilgrimage routes, temples, churches, mosques, or synagogues, are more than just landmarks. They serve as a profound symbols of belonging and spiritual sentences for diverse communities. These sites anchor society's offerings a sense of continuity, identity, and purpose across generations. In times of increasing polarization and social divisions, these sites hold even more importance. They create opportunities for reflection, dialogue, and connection among people, fostering a sense of commonality, even among different faiths and cultural backgrounds. Sacred spaces can bridge divides, along for the celebration of differences within shared social and cultural frameworks. As we find ourselves in the context of the G20 Interfaith Forum, which is basically bringing G20 ministers of finances. Therefore, I would like to emphasize financial support, efforts to safeguard these sites because they often fall short. Restoration and preservation efforts, security measures, what Cole just mentioned, to protect against acts of violence or vandalism, and environmental protections, all this requires robust and sustainable funding. While many religious communities and governments play a key role in maintaining worship places, the scale of challenges today demands broader international cooperation and financial strategies. So the challenges that I was reflecting in terms of financial support are the following. For example, there is limited national budgets. Many countries, especially those experiencing economic hardship or conflict, struggle to allocate enough resources to preserve places of worship. Lack of international coordination. While international bodies like UNESCO provide support for some sites, there is a lack of coordinated global funding mechanisms focused specifically on the protection of religious sites. Private donations alone are insufficient. Many places of worship depend heavily on private donations, but these are often unpredictable and cannot meet the growing needs of restoration, protection, and maintenances. Competing priorities, for example. National governments and global organizations must balance the needs of heritage protection with other pressing concerns, such as economic development, infrastructure, and education. Therefore, in the light of these several key proposals, I would just emphasize that there is a need to establish a global fund for sacred sites. I have just 1 minute. And then to encourage national governments, 2 minutes, okay, great. This is good news, thank you. Encourage national governments to allocate dedicated budgets and to promote public-private partnership under certain criteria, as well to create multilateral insurance scheme for sacred sites, as well in all this debate to engage religious and faith-based organizations, and of course to promote sustainable and responsible tourism, which means in some worship places, for example, setting visitor limits at vulnerable sites, then encouraging ecotourism initiatives to focus on preserving both cultural and environmental integrity of religious sites, supporting programs that educate tourists on the cultural and spiritual significance of these spaces to foster respect and awareness. And of course, as we are living in digital age, last but not least, it is very important to recommend development of the digital platforms and campaigns that allow individuals and organizations around the world to contribute to the preservation of religious sites. So I would stop here. And I hope that we still can continue discussions about the criteria under which we could actually request or develop maybe some global or interreligious funding commission who would basically deal with financial support for the protection of the worship places and cultural heritage around the world. Thank you.
So yes, you have a question? Okay.
Okay.
In English then?
Okay.
Okay, so I'm Andres Martinez with the U.S. Institute of Peace, but I'm asking this question as a Colombian. So I would like to know what efforts, maybe good practices you have developed to protect those natural sites that are intrinsically tied to the well-being of certain communities, like indigenous communities. In the Colombian context, that has to do with internal displacement. Once you remove the population from that area, how can you expect them to go back to some sort of normality if that place has been maybe destroyed? So what are your thoughts on that?
Você falou muito rápido, mas eu vou tentar, por favor.
I am. Pero tú hablas
You
también.
speak very fast.
Él habla castellano.
Sí,
lento,
mejor
muy lento.
para mí.
¿Cuáles son las prácticas, buenas prácticas que existan en Brasil para
Sí.
la protección de lugares naturales, especialmente aquellos lugares naturales que están atados, muy unidos al bienestar de las poblaciones indígenas, el bosque, la montaña, el río?
Se preferem, puedo tentar
Sí.
responder em espanhol.
Ya.
Pode ser que
También.
traduzir para o inglês mais
Da
fácil.
lo mismo.
Eh,
Da lo
Bien,
mismo en portugués.
a situação em Brasil é muito complexa. A situação de los indígenas em Brasil é muito complexa.
Ya.
Há regiões onde há conflitos muito intensos, expulsões, também conflito com os garimpeiros, como que aqueles que fazem mineração ilegal.
Mineros, ya. Yeah.
Pero
We have a lot of problems here in Bolivia, the situation of indigenous people, in Brazil, sorry, I am from Bolivia. The situation of Brazil is very delicate for indigenous peoples because there are a lot of conflicts, especially conflicts with illegal mines.
em certas regiões onde há muitos indígenas, infelizmente as pessoas não los concebem como com os mesmos direitos que os outros.
In many
Há
places where-
culturas que favorecem a atenção.
Yeah, it happens that there are a lot of cultures that are creating tensions, and in many places where you have a lot of indigenous peoples, they are not considered at the same level as the other citizens.
A igreja, por exemplo, católica hoje porque no passado também não ha hecho muy buen trabajo, pero hoy
Yeah,
quiero.
the church, the Catholic Church today, yeah, because in the past they were not doing also a very good.
A las veces
work.
hacía, por ejemplo, los jesuitas en Brasil, los franciscanos, frailes franciscanos,
Yeah.
tuvieron protección de los indígenas, pero las reducciones que se llamaban, no sé
Yeah.
en español,
What happened with the church was that the Jesuits, how to call it?
y
Jesuits?
franciscanos,
Yeah, and Franciscans were doing some reservations for indigenous peoples.
en pasado.
In
Pero
the past.
hoy hay una lucha muy intensa de protección, de denuncias. La conferencia de los obispos es una de las entidades más fuertes en la denuncia y de la presencia. Pero las religiones ni siempre tienen una actuación muy de defensa de los indígenas.
Yeah. What happens is that the religions not all the time are defending the rights of indigenous peoples, but we have the situation of the how to call coalition of arzobispos.
La conferencia de los obispos de Brasil.
The conference of yeah.
Arzobispos.
sorry, I'm not so religious in
bispos,
this.
En
kind
Brasil
of
es muy actuante, muy crítica y por esto a las veces es relacionada con la izquierda porque políticamente hay una manipulación. Yo escribo sobre esto. Recientemente puede ser que salga en texto de Cedire, que una manipulación ideológico-religiosa muy intensa de estos debates políticos.
Oh yeah, there is a big debate and a political debate about the work that they are yeah.
Y todo, porque hay polarizaciones.
Yeah. We have a very polarized society today.
Bien, la legislación es muy clara,
The legislation
pero-
is very clear,
pero no sabemos que la situación de los indígenas,
but we don't know that if the situation of indigenous peoples,
dos campos sagrados dos indígenas,
we
dos
don't
lugares,
know about the secret places of indigenous peoples.
são os que mais chegam, são os que mais chegam, são os que
Yeah.
mais ligam a la Comisión Interamericana de
Oh yeah.
y Y por
Ah,
esto hay también denuncias
Yeah,
en
there
toda
are
la
some-
América y también
yeah,
Brasil.
there are some court cases from indigenous peoples that are coming to the international, to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights.
So I see three other questions. Let's see, Juan Navarro Floria, Majinder Pal,
And I have
and then I'll let you be third. Yeah, so Juan first. Do you want to?
Marcio said at the end of his intervention this related to the sacred sites of the indigenous people, the jurisprudence of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights that has very, very strong pronunciations. In fact, the issue that related with religion is most important in the jurisprudence of the Inter-American Court is this: the rights of the of the indigenous peoples related with the land and with the nature and with their sacred sites. This is one thing. The other, my other comment is this: some of the speakers talk about the situations when one religious group attacks or destroy the religious sacred places of another one. But there are another phenomenon nowadays that I would like to attract the attention, which is, at least in my country, but I think that in all Latin America and maybe in other countries, which is the attacks against religious places, not from another religious group, but other groups in the society, mainly the LGBTs groups, the feminist groups. In my country, is very usual that the churches, Catholic churches, evangelical churches, are attacked, are not destroyed, but more or less, for these groups. It only is a comment. I don't know if any of the panel has something to say about this. Thank you.
Okay, I'll let you go next, and then Majinder Pal.
Okay.
Then you.
Quickly, I'm speaking here from Guyana, which is next to Brazil, as well as from the Caribbean. So a couple of things to point out. First of all, for this part of this world, especially in Guyana there, we cannot speak about sacred sites without the involvement of the indigenous communities, because more or less these sacred sites are located in these indigenous communities. That's one. The second thing also, Guyana position is unique when it comes to indigenous population, in that majority, if not all, the indigenous communities are identified by some religious connection to one of the churches, primarily the Christian churches. Hence, sacred sites in indigenous communities are not looked upon as a religious site, but more sort of spiritual site. My question now, the whole thing about Guyana, each of these villages have leadership that has a role to play in the protection of these sacred sites. Now, if they're doing that, the fact that these sites are spiritual and not religious, should the religious community within these villages play a part also in the protection of these sites? I also, from in Guyana, we have the Interreligious organization. And it's true that politics has played its role in terms of creating division, but we are very fortunate in Guyana that it hasn't really created that problem, because you see, when you're a religious leader, you have to ask who you're serving first, whether God or politics. And for us in Guyana there, we were able to protect ourselves that, God come first. So even though people may have different politically, they do not disturb the religious community. So I think one thing we need to do, especially perhaps in Brazil here, is to encourage the leaderships of the different faiths to come together and understand that the role they need to play, putting God first and politics after. Thank you.
Okay, let's see, Majinder Pal.
Yeah, it's nice to listen to all the problems, because then you see yours being talked about in a different way too. I was asked to represent the Sikh community of Afghanistan, I think sister here would know. When the Taliban took over in 2020, they had to leave behind some 60 gurdwaras. Gurdwaras are places of prayer, of which at least 10 to 15, I believe, were historical. That goes back to the time of our guru. So I'm very interested in the proposals Elizabeth has been discussing about how there could be a global response, and not only in terms of insurance or funding or whatever, but if there could be advisories available about the way forward. Now, those 6 are not in Afghanistan. They've got about 10 people left behind who've decided to risk their limb in life to protect their sacred sites. The government assures them everything is safe, but we know it could be otherwise. So these are all unique situations. So I like Elizabeth's suggestion. I wonder what this panel can come forth with to suggest that there should be a global council where one could get advice, experience shared about how you handled your sacred sites, where the land also is in question, because it's not just a desecration issue, the ownership of something which you cannot have because you're not there, because you had to leave. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat. I agree totally with her. But thank you very much for giving me the word. I am coming from Bolivia.
We gave you some extra words.
Yeah. No, I am an indigenous healer. We call Hampiris. And for me, this is the reason of my life, sacred places. And we have in Bolivia and in whole Latin America a World Heritage declared by UNESCO, the Capajñan. It's this long road of 40,000 kilometers built with holy places. And the holy places of our ancestors were water sources, places where you had many minerals, mountains, because they were source of our life. And now what is happening is that we have some rights by UNESCO, let's say, but the states have also another rights because they are trying to build the infrastructures and they don't mind destroying these places. And these places for us, for indigenous peoples, have to do not only for buildings, but they have to do with life. They are sources of water, they are sources of minerals, and that is why it is so important. And we have a cross-cutting situation where many issues are confronting these sacred places. And I would like to ask you, this is the first time that I'm coming here, and I'm very happy and privileged to be. But it should be really interesting to create a sort of council, let's say, on how we can deal with these issues. Because it has to do with everybody. It doesn't matter the religion we have. The religion is life. Thank you.
I want to abuse the authority of the chair to just say raise a couple of additional things. I want to raise one additional question. It's not exactly like Juan's, but it's a different kind of angle that these things get perceived from. It's been touched on in some ways, but one of the problems often is many of these sites have what you could call museum value. That they may be culturally significant for the country. I can think of a lot of places in Europe that would be like this. And one of the problems is sometimes the people who are concerned about the museum value are different than the worshipers. A case I remember, I don't remember how it came out, unfortunately, but it was in Boston. After Vatican II, the church wanted to turn the altar around so it would face the congregation. And the museum people, that is the planning people, the landmarking staff, said, you can't do that. That would change the historical nature of this building. Well, I mean, I think one of the other issues that's buried between all of this, how do we protect the worshipers? What do we do when the worshipers are no longer there? I remember working on a law on cemeteries in Romania, and it was Jewish cemeteries, and there were no Jews left for obvious reasons. So the idea of a commission, the idea of coming up with resources to deal with this in ways that don't violate church-state separation principles where those are applicable. These are complicated issues, but maybe I could. We've had quite a. Let me take. Okay, we'll take one more question. Then I'm going to turn things over to the panel. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Carl. Fred Nyabera is my name.
3 more questions.
Yeah, Fred Nyabera. Maybe just picking up on Elizabeth's comment on using digital campaign, but I'm also wondering how we need to reflect more on using digital and technology for preservation, not necessarily for the campaign. How do you preserve some of these sites, some of this text for future generations, because the world has really changed?
Really picking up on you just mentioned the issue of church-state separation. So I'm referring here to a particularly American problem, but I really want to expand the question, which is what I'll call the reification of the law problem. That is, you will have people say, we would love to accommodate the Native American concern about sacred sites, but that would be a problem of church-state separation because we'd be not allowing the government to do certain things with the government because that would be doing things for a religious reason, whereas those sacred sites were sacred sites for Native Americans hundreds of years before Europeans came to the shores of the United States and before there was the United States of America. And somehow it seems to me that you can't simply apply rules that make perfect sense in the context of current conflicts and apply them to uses of land that go back many, many centuries. So I'm wondering whether other countries have had this problem of figuring out how to deal with doctrines that work in one context but don't work in the context of historic sacred sites.
Okay, let's see, there was Elias, then I want to come back to our panel.
Thank you. In some place, we have, can I call the problem, that the current worship place built on older place of other spirituality, especially in the case that former sacred place of indigenous spiritualities. This is the case of Cusco in Peru, my country, my current country. And now you can find church, cathedral over the sacred place. But also in Europe, you have the same question, about the cathedral in Córdoba or Santa Sofia in Istanbul. What ideas the panel can share about how we can to find some kind of, not solution, but understanding, because the religious community that today has the ownership of this place, they don't accept to include other worship from other faiths.
So as I turn it back to the panel, obviously they should have solutions, right? Because as Elias has just pointed out, these are the classic problems when one thinks of the Ayodhya Mosque in India, the Temple Mount in Israel, the Cordoba, Hagia Sophia, and I'm sure there are a lot of others. So maybe, Knox, you've worked on these things and you've seen this as an opening, but it's been an opening for warfare as well as for peace. So seeing it from your angle would be very helpful.
I mean, the fact that history is layered, and literally when it comes to sacred sites, that is absolutely the case, where the conqueror would build their place of spiritual importance on top of the conquered's. And so what does that mean today? From the comments on the panel and the questions, I think, of course, there's this first first need of just defending these sacred places from the ravages of just time. When communities have dwindled away, who is there to take care of them? How do you find the funding for it? It's incredibly expensive. There's also the issues of attacks against current places of worship. Our Ahmadiyya friend did not mention how their mosques in Pakistan are under almost constant assault from extremists. There are examples like that around the world, so that's sort of defensive work. And I think, and then you have the indigenous question of when they have sacred spaces that aren't tied to traditional or European norms of property rights. I think this is where the Inter-American system has done some really groundbreaking thinking on that, which actually has been spreading into the African Commission of Human and People's Rights and their jurisprudence. But the challenge is the indigenous concept of sacred spaces doesn't fit the European concept of property rights. And how do you resolve that is a question that will remain. So this goes back to sort of my original presentation about finding ways to create communities of inclusion around these sacred sites, because raising the funds is very difficult from external sources that don't have a vested interest. But if we can find a way to get the community to have buy-in, that maybe this sacred site is not part of my religious tradition, but it is part of my community. My community would benefit by having it preserved, by having it restored, by having it protected. Or my community, this is a contested site. There's a complicated narrative. Well, our community would benefit from having those conversations about that and recognizing the current ownership is different from the previous ownership, and just saying up front, this is hard. This is emotional. And I would add one last thing. We were talking about networks and creating some type of commission or body. I do advise the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance, and we've launched a working group on the nexus of religious freedom and sacred sites. And we have occasional meetings with the diplomats who are a part of this alliance. As I heard the comments from my co-panelists and the audience, I think perhaps this is a good place to build off of that and to bring more groups together, because there are these silos between the cultural heritage preservation world that just want to protect it because it's old, and the living religious communities that want to use it and venerate it because it's spiritual in nature. And there isn't enough connectivity, and I think that's an area where this alliance working group could be helpful, or the I-20 moving forward if this becomes a consistent topic of discussion.
Are there any other responses from the panel that people would like to make, either in Portuguese or English? Yes.
Okay, just a short comment. The speech that you heard, which actually lasted a little bit less than 5 minutes, let's say 4.5, it is basically a task for the next 10 years. So it's very easily to prepare the speech.
Very economical that you could do
yes,
that in 15 minutes.
but this takes lots of work, lots of preparation, collection, let's say collecting the information, analyzing, critical review, then organizing let's say the network, then the advocacy, then of course approaching the governments and so on. First of all, just to start the procedure that already cost. It is cost by itself until we reach the final goal, and this is basically to have some global fund for the protection of the sacred sites. But as Conference of European Churches, of course, to come to this type of speech, we have organized Summer School for Human Rights in Malaga this summer, where we actually invited colleagues from the European Investment Bank in Luxembourg, from the Council of Europe Development Bank in Paris, then from the EBRD, this is a Bank for Reconstruction and Development in London. And we have asked them how actually a religious community can access to the funding coming from the banking, what is basically the legal procedure. And in some cases, with the worship places which are under UNESCO regime, basically they need to come to the Ministry of Culture. Ministry of Culture puts on the agenda of the Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance, of course, bring that to the Council of Ministers. Once it is adopted, then the proposal, for example, goes to the Council of Europe Development Bank, or it goes to the European Investment Bank, and so on. So these are, let's say, long procedures. And at the moment, as Conference of European Churches, we are actually collecting the data because every bank has different procedure. And therefore, of course, it will take some time simply to collect the information, analyze the information, and see what is possible. But of course, without engagement of the local communities on the ground, advocating vis-a-vis their own government, that these are their needs, basically it is impossible only for some small NGO or associations on European level or global level to go for it.
So, Your Eminence Nikitas, you've got a good person here. I don't know if... I would like to report that it's easier in the G20, but it's not. So but I do think some of the practical ideas of thinking about how we get some kind of interfaith group that could work on this, yes.
Many times there are resources available and nobody knocks on the door. Elizabeta brought up the subject of the summer school, and our own membership was poor in attendance. So there are means of educating people. Most things depend on education, at least for me. So there are resources, and there are means, and there are funds available, but you have to know how to get to them. And the average person does not know. I shouldn't say the average person, the average religious community, the institution, organization does not know how to get to the funds.
Juan, you have a solution?
He's going to be the first donor.
Only one comment about the concern of the separation of church and state related with this.
Yeah.
My first comment is separation between church and state is not a dogma. There are many models. We can have a strict separation, some other models respecting religious freedom. So this is, but the other thing is, if the state sustain and take charge of all the historical places and cultural places, unless the religious ones, because are religious, this sounds as a discrimination, I think. So it's not a problem, the separation between churches, because we are talking about the conservation of places which are significant for the community, religious and not religious. We cannot discriminate the religious ones because they're religious. This is my one opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead.
When I was at the State Department working in the Office of International Religious Freedom, and this is when ISIS had invaded Iraq and was committing a genocide against people, but also a cultural genocide, working to destroy churches, Yazidi temples, mosques they didn't like. So as we were thinking about how to recreate conditions where religious minority communities would feel like they had a future in Iraq, we wanted to address the destruction of their sacred sites. So I started to engage different parts of the State Department outside of the Human Rights Bureau, as we called it, and there's a Cultural Heritage Center. And so I went to talk to them about, hey, how can we work together? The United States is a real leader in providing resources. There's something called the Ambassadors Fund for Cultural Heritage Preservation, which churches can apply for. But they were very skeptical of me coming in, they very quickly said, First Amendment, separation of church and state. And I said, yeah, I get it. I'm all for it. But your goal is to protect these ancient places. My goal is to have the ancient places that these communities have used to be rehabilitated. I'm not saying let's build new churches or new mosques. That would be a violation. But we can restore what was old using the funds that you have, and they once they understood my approach was in line with their thinking, and that while we're coming from different directions and different interests, we shared a goal in seeing the old church, the old mosque, the old fire temple being brought back into functional space. And so I think that's that kind of creative thinking where you can find those allies, perhaps for the European Council of Churches. I'm no longer with U.S. Department of State, but they have a lot of resources that are available for churches to apply for. It's very technical. It's not for the layperson. You need architects and designers to explain how the money would be used. But there are a lot of opportunities from the U.S., from the U.K., and others to bring these resources to bear to help preserve these important places for small communities.
Now, one of the things I think will be clear from this discussion is that we're onto a very complex issue, one that's vital to a lot of communities, and finding some way to work forward. And some of the practical suggestions that Elizabeta has brought forward, I think, are very helpful. I just want to give a chance to Maria Claudia. You're talking about the sort of the front burner political tensions as well, and how one might approach those. I mean, there is sort of the religious freedom approach that Knox is talking about, but I don't know if you've had other ideas. You've helped us be aware of the problem, but you have suggested ways forward for Brazil. I mean, I have to say, as a religious freedom person most of my life, Brazil has this record of being a great place for religious freedom, except for exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
We used it to be, we still are, I think. But there is a raising problem, increasing one, and the rates are getting higher dangerously. So we must address the issue of separation of church and state and political speeches from religious questions. I think it would be great if we have in this larger council a kind of a board to address this specific point, because I don't know if, I'm not sure. I think in the United States we have the same problem arising right now, that mixture things arising, political questions and religious questions getting together dangerously. We have the war, the Israel war, and we're having increasing rates of anti-Semitism, getting together with the country's positions in the war between Hamas and Israel. So things are getting dangerously close in Brazil. And maybe this should be a specific point to be addressed concerning the religious sites and the faith sites.
This helps underscore Knox's starting point that we need to find ways to have communities come together,
yeah.
Both national communities, local communities, and we're facing rising tides of polarization, but we need to find ways to diffuse the polarization. And this is the kind of body here, and the larger body that's here, that can really work on and think about these things. Other questions? We've got about 5 minutes left. Yeah. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Something that I wanted to clarify, you're talking about religions, Catholic, yeah. But indigenous peoples, we don't have a specific religion. If we have a religion, it is because of the colonization. Mm-hmm. And what we do is that we mixed up, we have a syncretism. And how can we apply as healers, let's say? It is not a religion, it is our spirituality. We don't talk about the religion within us.
Yeah, well, go ahead. You wanted to make a comment.
I think just completing a bit what I understand. Obviously, we have like all the legal experts and pointing from this part, and I would like to just add more from the spiritual part. I think that's why also what my colleague just said, that many times the religious parts, we don't know the legal tools, right? At the same time, I think that it's also very important and essential that we work closely. those who have the legal expertise from the political side, but also from the religious spiritual side. Because you can put the basic framework by establishing certain laws and legal framework, but the reformation of a mentality, of ideology, or the mindset of people, I think the faith, spirituality, and religions are basic. So I think in my case, if I see also Elias and Juan was also mentioning, I remember that we, as I'm born and raised in Germany, and we especially deal with Shoah, the Holocaust. I remember a German writer who used to say that when in the beginning the Nazis, they came for the communist, I would think, why should I be worried? I'm not a communist. When they started coming for the Jews, I thought, I'm not a Jew. Why should it worry me? And further going upon and upon, and at the end, he said that then they came for me, but I was looking around, there was no one left to now raise voice for me or protect me. So I think that's why it's so important for us to not just be worried about our own religious freedom, but as well for the religious freedom of others. And to take it as an attack against our own religious freedom, the attack of anyone's religious temple or freedom. That's why I think it's more the vision to change our vision. Like the famous saying, the glass is half full or half empty. So I think the plan is, we have more than enough space, but we just need to open up more our hearts and minds.
Gustaría solamente de hablar un poco de tu cuestión, porque por ejemplo en Brasil me parece que el problema no es solamente contra las religiones afro-brasileñas, pero también contra los indígenas, porque es una situación de violencia simbólica e invisible. Es muy, porque no se percibe que es un grupo que también tiene sus creencias, que tiene sus... Es solamente este... Gracias. Sí, física también.
Yeah. Sure.
Sí, sí.
Yeah. Well, I think we are coming to the end of our time. I think 2 or 3 things stand out. One, while we have a lot of priorities with the G20, this is one that is, in a way, a sort of a quiet one, but it's starting to explode in our sensitivities. That is, we understand that this is very important, very complicated, that we need input from a lot of different peoples. We need to find resources, but also communal resources, financial resources, goodwill resources, and I think one of the things that we will certainly, I can assure you, as the G20 Interfaith leadership, we will continue fostering this subject. We will be working on this, working forward. To the extent any of you are interested in joining in this work, would be most grateful, and we're very thankful for your participation here and also for the wonderful panel. So thank you very much.
Thank you.